My wife humiliated me at my father's funeral. 3 months later, I came home early for Christmas and found her boss, our lawyer, and divorce papers waiting. Perfect timing, she said. Then his phone rang. They went pale. I smiled. My name is Howard Phillips. I'm 64 years old, and for the past 38 years, I worked as a field agent for the IRS. I know what you're thinking. Nobody likes the tax man. Fair enough. But that job taught me something invaluable. How to follow the money, how to spot patterns in the chaos, and most importantly, how to document everything. Those skills would become my greatest weapon when my world fell apart. 3 days before Christmas, I woke up alone in the house I'd paid off 15 years ago. No smell of coffee brewing, no sound of Linda getting ready for work. Just silence. My parents were gone now. Mom died back in May, heart attack while gardening. Dad followed her in September, massive stroke. The doctor said it was quick, but I knew better. He couldn't stand the thought of being without her. They'd been married 42 years. I was supposed to spend Christmas with Linda and our daughter Hannah at the family cabin in Vermont. Linda said she'd drive up separately because of some last-minute work emergency. That should have been my first clue, but grief makes you blind to the obvious. I went into my study that morning to look for the old photo albums. Hannah had asked for pictures of her grandparents for some project. That's when I found it, wedged behind a row of tax law textbooks I hadn't touched in years. A leather notebook, dark brown, the kind Linda always said looked too old-fashioned. "Why can't you just use your phone like normal people?" she'd asked once. I opened it out of curiosity. Page 1. Howard, do you have to breathe so loudly when you eat? Page 5. Maybe if you actually made partner at a real firm instead of working for the government. Page 12. No one wants to hear about your boring tax cases, Howard. There were 49 entries. I counted them, each one a small cut, a dismissive remark she'd made over the years. But it wasn't just what she said, it was where she said it. In front of her colleagues at the company Christmas party, at Hannah's college graduation dinner, at my father's wake. That last one still burns. September 24th, after we'd buried Dad. We were at the reception, surrounded by his old Marine buddies and distant relatives. Stephen Walsh was there too, Linda's boss from Capital Trust Financial. I met him a few times at company events. Smooth talker, expensive suits, the kind of guy who wore cologne that cost more than my monthly car payment. Linda had pulled me aside, near the buffet table. "Howard, you need to circulate more. Stop standing in the corner like some depressed ghost. Stephen's been kind enough to show up. The least you can do is make conversation." I remember looking at her, really looking at her, for the first time in months. Her makeup was perfect. Her black dress fit like it had been tailored, which it probably had been. And she was looking at me like I was an embarrassment, a burden she had to manage in front of the important people. I didn't argue. I never did back then. Just nodded and went to shake hands with people whose names I forget by morning. But I wrote it down later. Entry 49, at Dad's funeral, made me feel like I was the one who died. I sat in my study that December morning, reading through every entry, and something cold settled in my chest. Not rage, not grief, something else. Clarity maybe, the kind that comes when you finally stop making excuses for someone and start seeing the pattern for what it really is. I'd been documenting her cruelty for years without even realizing it. Now it was time to document something else. People think working for the IRS is just about auditing tax returns and chasing down people who forgot to report their side hustles. They're wrong. What they don't know, what they can't know, is that some of us do different work, deeper work. For the last 9 years of my career, I've been operating as a confidential informant for the agency's criminal investigation division. Not the kind of informant who wears a wire and meets in parking garages. No, my role was quieter. I identified corporate fraud, money laundering schemes, shell companies designed to hide assets from federal scrutiny. I had immunity, federal protection, and a direct line to prosecutors who could move mountains when the evidence was solid. Linda never knew. She thought I pushed papers and reviewed 1040 forms. Let her think it. The less she knew about my actual capabilities, the better. The morning I found that journal, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Patrick Flynn, a private investigator I'd worked with on a case 5 years back. He owed me a favor, a big one. I'd helped him dodge an IRS audit that would have buried his business when his ex-wife tried to destroy him with false reporting. He answered on the second ring. "Howard," Flynn said, his voice gravelly from too many cigarettes. Been a while. What do you need? Background check, I said. Stephen Walsh, CEO of Capital Trust Financial. I want everything. Financial records, business associates, personal connections, particularly anything involving international transactions or offshore accounts. There was a pause. This official or personal? Personal, but it might become official. Got it. Give me 72 hours. The second call was to Daniel Reeves, my former supervisor at the IRS. He'd retired 3 years ago, but still had connections that ran deep. I told him I needed a quiet review of Capital Trust Financial's federal filings, specifically looking for discrepancies in their executive compensation reports and any unusual patterns in their corporate reimbursements. You fishing or do you have a lead? Reeves asked. I have a theory. Need confirmation before I move. I'll make some calls. Unofficially. The third call was the hardest. I dialed my daughter Hannah's number and waited while it rang. She picked up on the fourth ring, her voice bright and cheerful. Dad, I was just thinking about you. Are we still doing Christmas in Vermont? Hannah, I said carefully, I need you to do something for me. And I need you not to ask questions yet. Her tone shifted. What's wrong? Check your email in about 5 minutes. I'm sending you a video file. It's password protected. The password is Semper Fi. That had been my father's Marine Corps motto. Hannah would understand the significance. Dad, you're scaring me. I know, but this is important. Watch the video. Keep it safe. Don't tell your mother. Can you do that for me? There was a long silence. Then, okay, I trust you. After I hung up, I spent the next hour recording a message on my laptop. I explained everything I suspected about Linda and Stephen. I showed her the journal entries, the timeline of Linda's late nights and mysterious work trips. I didn't have proof of the affair yet, but I had patterns. And patterns don't lie. I also told her something else. Something I discovered 2 months ago when I'd accessed Linda's medical records through a contact at the insurance company. 3 medical procedures over the past 6 years, all coded as outpatient surgery. All billed through Capital Trust Financial's executive health plan. All scheduled during weeks when Linda told me she was at corporate training seminars. The procedures were listed under a generic code, but I'd cross-referenced the facility. Women's Health Clinic, specialized in reproductive services. I couldn't prove what those procedures were. Not yet, but I had my suspicions. I ended the video with a simple statement. Hannah, whatever happens next, whatever your mother tells you about me, know this. I love you. I've always loved you. And I'm not going to let anyone rewrite the truth of who I am or what this family was supposed to be. I encrypted the file and sent it. Then I packed my bag for Vermont. But I wasn't going to wait until Christmas to show up. I was going 3 days early, and I wasn't going to announce my arrival. Sometimes the best way to catch someone off guard is to show up when they think you're still far away, still in the dark, still the fool they've been playing for years. I wasn't that man anymore. The drive to Vermont took 6 hours. I didn't listen to music, didn't stop for coffee, just drove through the gray December afternoon with my mind running calculations, probabilities, outcomes. By the time I pulled into the driveway of our family cabin, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything in shades of orange and red. Linda's car was there. So was Stephen Walsh's silver Lexus. And a third vehicle I didn't recognize, a black BMW with New York plates. I sat in my truck for a moment, watching the warm light spilling from the windows. Through the glass, I could see figures moving inside. Heard faint laughter. They were having a party. In my family's cabin. The one my father had built with his own hands 40 years ago. I grabbed the bag of wrapped presents from the passenger seat, gifts I bought weeks ago when I still believed in the illusion of a happy family Christmas. Then I walked up the snow-covered path and opened the front door. The laughter stopped like someone had cut a wire. Linda stood near the fireplace, holding a wine glass. She was wearing a dark red dress I'd never seen before, her hair styled in a way that looked professional, deliberate. Stephen Walsh sat on a leather couch, tie loosened, looking comfortable in a way that made my jaw tighten. And there, at the dining table, sat 2 other people. A man in an expensive suit, late 50s, with the practiced neutrality of a lawyer. And another woman I didn't recognize, younger, professional, with a tablet in front of her. Hannah was there too, standing halfway up the stairs, her eyes wide with something between confusion and fear. Linda recovered first. Her surprise melted into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Howard," she said, voice bright and artificial. "You're early. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." I set the gift bag down by the door. "Change of plans." Stephen stood up, extending his hand like we were a business meeting. "Howard, good to see you. Linda mentioned you'd be joining us for the holidays. I hope you don't mind. I brought some colleagues along. We were just wrapping up some year-end business." I looked at his hand, but didn't take it. Instead, I scanned the room slowly. The documents spread across the dining table. The glasses of wine. The forced casualness of people caught doing something they shouldn't be doing. "Year-end business," I repeated. "On December 22nd. In my family's cabin." The lawyer stepped forward, extending his own hand. "Gerard Hutchins," he said. "I represent Mrs. Phillips in certain financial matters. We were just reviewing some documents. Since you're here, though, perhaps we can expedite things." "Expedite what?" Linda's smile tightened. She set down her wine glass and picked up a folder from the table. "Howard, we need to talk about some practical matters. Our marriage, the financial arrangements. Gerard has prepared some paperwork that would make things simpler for everyone." I looked at Hannah. She was gripping the stair railing so hard her knuckles were white. She'd watched the video I sent. She knew what was coming. "You're just in time to sign," Linda said, holding out the folder. I didn't take it. Instead, I pulled out my phone and set it on the table, screen facing up. "Before I sign anything," I said calmly, "I think we should wait for the call." Stephen frowned. "What call?" As if on cue, his phone rang. The sound cut through the room like a gunshot. He pulled it from his pocket, glanced at the screen, and his face went pale. I watched the color drain from his cheeks, saw the micro-expression of pure panic before he tried to mask it. "I should take this," he muttered. "Put on speaker," I said. "Not a request. A statement." He looked at Linda. She looked at the lawyer. The lawyer looked at me like he was reassessing a situation that had just gone sideways. Stephen answered. "Walsh here." The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, female. "Mr. Walsh, this is Jennifer Caruso from the Board of Directors Legal Counsel. We've received some documentation regarding financial irregularities at Capital Trust Financial. We need you to suspend all business activities immediately and return to New York for a formal review. This is effective as of this phone call." The silence that followed was absolute. Stephen's hand trembled slightly. Linda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The lawyer's practiced neutrality shattered into something close to alarm. I smiled. Not a big smile, just enough to let them know I've been waiting for exactly this moment. "So," I said quietly, "should we still talk about those documents?" Stephen ended the call with hands that weren't quite steady. He looked at Linda, then at me, then back at his phone like it might offer some explanation for how his world had just collapsed in under 30 seconds. "Howard," Linda said, her voice sharp now, defensive. "What did you do?" I pulled out a chair and sat down at the dining table, right across from Gerard Hutchins. I folded my hands on the table like we were about to negotiate a business deal. I did what I've always done. I follow the money. And when the money doesn't add up, I report it to the appropriate authorities. Stephen's face flushed red. "You reported me? To the board? For what?" "Corporate reimbursements that don't match expense reports. Hotel charges billed as client development when there were no clients listed. Medical insurance claims processed through executive benefits for procedures that had nothing to do with you." I let that last part hang in the air. Should I continue? Linda's wine glass slipped from her fingers. It didn't shatter, just thudded against the carpet, dark red liquid spreading across the beige fibers like blood. "You went through my medical records?" "No," I said calmly. "I went through the company's medical insurance filings. There's a difference. One's a federal disclosure document. The other would be illegal." I looked at Gerard. "You might want to explain that distinction to your client." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Phillips, I think we should all take a moment to calm down and discuss this rationally." "I am calm," I said. "In fact, I've never been calmer in my life." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a document of my own. Not the divorce papers Linda's lawyer had prepared. Something else entirely. I placed it on the table, aligned it perfectly with the edge, and slid it across to Linda. "This is the original trust document my father established 3 years before he died. I had it reviewed by my own attorney last week. It's very specific about the conditions under which assets transfer." Linda picked it up, scanning the pages. Her eyes moved faster and faster as she read. This can't be right. It says that the trust, which includes this cabin, the investment portfolio, and the family estate, transfers to me in full upon my father's death under one of two conditions. Either I remain married until age 65, or I divorce due to verified spousal misconduct with documented proof of infidelity or fraud. Gerard leaned over to read it himself. His professional mask slipped further. This is a conditional marital trust. I wasn't aware. Mrs. Phillips, did you know about this? Of course I didn't know about it. Linda snapped. She looked at me with something close to hatred. Your father put a leash on you from beyond the grave. My father protected his legacy, I corrected. He knew what kind of person you were long before I figured it out. He tried to warn me at the engagement. Said you smiled too much at other men. I thought he was just being old-fashioned. I leaned back in my chair. Turns out he was just being observant. Stephen had been silent, staring at his phone like more bad news might arrive at any second. What documentation did you send to the board? He finally asked. Everything. Expense reports cross-referenced with calendar entries. Hotel security footage from the Carmine Suites showing you and Linda checking in together on 3 separate occasions when she told me she was at corporate training seminars. Medical billing records showing procedures coded to your company's executive health plan that had nothing to do with executive health. I paused. And then there's the other matter. Linda's face went from red to white. What other matter? I pulled out my phone and opened a folder. Showed her a photograph. It was 8 years old, taken at a hospital in Albany. A birth certificate, partially visible. Mother's name, Linda Phillips. Father's name, blank. You told me you were helping your cousin arrange an adoption, that her baby needed a good home after she died in childbirth. You even cried when you told me the story. My voice stayed level, factual. There was no cousin. There was just you, 9 months pregnant, giving birth to a son you've been hiding for 8 years. A son who currently lives with Stephen's sister in Connecticut under the name Lucas Walsh. The room went so silent I could hear the wind outside, rattling the windows. Stephen collapsed back onto the couch like someone had cut his strings. His face had gone from red to gray in the span of 30 seconds. That child, he said hoarsely. Lucas. He's not. We agreed this would stay private. You agreed, I corrected. Linda agreed. I was never part of that conversation because I was never supposed to know about it. I pulled out my phone again and scrolled through the photos. Patrick Flynn, the private investigator I hired, he's very thorough. Turns out he had a personal interest in this case. Gerard leaned forward. What kind of personal interest? The kind that comes from being defrauded out of $500,000. I showed them a photograph on my phone. It was a business document, dated 12 years ago. A real estate development partnership between Stephen Walsh and Patrick Flynn. You remember Patrick, don't you, Stephen? Your old business partner? The one you forced out of your company after the Atlantic Ridge project. Stephen's jaw tightened. That was a legal business dissolution. He was bought out fairly. He was bought out for 70 cents on the dollar after you manipulated the property assessment and sold the land to a shell company you controlled. I set the phone down. Patrick spent 3 years trying to prove it, but your lawyers buried him in paperwork. Cost him his business, his marriage, almost cost him his PI license. Patrick had told me the whole story over whiskey 2 weeks ago. When you called me about Walsh, he'd said, I almost didn't believe it, but I wasn't going to pass up a chance to return the favor. He'd worked pro bono, digging through every corner of Stephen's life with the kind of dedication that only comes from personal vendetta. He found Lucas in 4 days. I continued. Followed a trail of medical payments from Capital Trust Financial to a pediatric clinic in Hartford. From there it was easy. Your sister Karen signed the school enrollment forms as guardian, but the emergency contact listed a Connecticut phone number registered to an LLC you own. Linda's voice was barely a whisper. You had no right. I had every right, I said. You spent 8 years lying to me. You gave birth to another man's child and convinced me we were helping a dying relative. You used my compassion as a weapon. I stood up, walked to the fireplace, and stared into the flames. The medical procedures, those weren't just cover stories. Those were terminations, weren't they? 3 of them over 6 years. All paid for through Stephen's corporate insurance. The silence was suffocating. How many times, Linda? How many times did you get pregnant by him and make it disappear? Was Lucas the only one you kept, or were there others? She didn't answer. just stared at me with tears streaming down her face, but I couldn't tell if they were from shame or anger at being caught. Stephen tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. This is insane. You can't prove any of this is illegal. You're right, I said calmly. Medical privacy laws protect the specifics, but I don't need to prove the procedures themselves. I just need to prove that Capital Trust Financial's executive health plan was used to cover personal expenses unrelated to legitimate medical care. That's insurance fraud, federal crime, and the IRS takes a very dim view of unreported taxable benefits. Gerard was frantically typing on his phone. Mr. Phillips, I think we need to pause this conversation until everyone has separate legal representation. Good idea, I said. You should probably get separate representation too, Gerard. Because if you prepared these divorce documents knowing about the hidden child and the insurance fraud, you might be looking at disbarment proceedings for aiding and fraud. The lawyer's face went pale. He closed his briefcase with shaking hands. Hannah finally spoke from the stairs, her voice cutting through the room like glass. Mom, is it true? Do I have a brother? Linda looked at her daughter, and for the first time, I saw something fracture in her composure. Not regret, just exhaustion. Hannah descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. When she reached the bottom, she didn't go to her mother. She came to me, standing beside my chair like a soldier taking position. I watched the video you sent, Hannah said quietly, looking directly at Linda. All of it. The timeline, the receipts, the hotel footage. Dad gave me the truth before you could lie about it. Linda's face twisted. Hannah, you don't understand. Your father is manipulating. Stop, Hannah said, her voice sharp enough to cut. I'm 22 years old. I understand exactly what's happening. You had an affair. You had a child with him. You lied about everything. Stephen tried to interject. Your mother and I don't care what you and my mother did, Hannah said coldly. I care that she made me believe my father was the problem. That he was cold, distant, checked out. But he wasn't checked out. He was watching, documenting, preparing. She looked at me with something like pride. He's smarter than both of you combined. I put my hand on her shoulder. Why don't you go to your room for a bit? This is about to get worse. She nodded and headed back upstairs, but not before giving Linda one last look of pure disappointment. Once she was gone, I pulled out another document from my briefcase. This one had a federal seal on it. Before we go any further, there's something else you should know. My work with the IRS didn't end when I retired. For the past 9 years, I've been serving as a confidential informant for the Criminal Investigation Division. Stephen's eyes widened. You're a federal informant? I have immunity for information provided in good faith to ongoing investigations. I have direct channels to federal prosecutors. And I have something called a CI agreement that protects me from retaliation or legal consequences when I report suspected criminal activity. I set the document on the table. Capital Trust Financial has been under passive monitoring for 18 months. Nothing formal, just routine oversight. But 3 weeks ago, I flagged some irregularities in your international wire transfers. Gerard spoke up, his voice strained. What kind of irregularities? The kind that involve shell companies in the Cayman Islands receiving payments from Chinese investment firms. Firms that are currently under investigation by the FBI for potential sanctions violations and money laundering. The color drained from Stephen's face completely. Those are legitimate investment partnerships. Maybe they are, I said. But when the FBI cross-references those payments with your company's federal contract work, especially the infrastructure projects you won through Department of Transportation bidding, they're going to want to know why a company handling sensitive government contracts is taking money from entities flagged for national security concerns. Linda finally found her voice. You reported Stephen to the FBI? I reported anomalies to my handler at the IRS. What they do with that information is their decision. I leaned back in my chair, but I imagine the FBI will want to have a conversation with both of you very soon, especially when they learn about the political donations. Stephen's head snapped up. What political donations? The ones made through your company to Senator Richard Holbrooke's re-election campaign. The same senator who sits on the Transportation Committee that approved your federal contracts. I pulled out yet another document. Linda helped arrange those donations, didn't she? Through her connections at the Capital Trust Financial Charity Foundation. Linda's hands were shaking now. I don't know what you're talking about. You introduced Stephen to the senator at a fundraiser 18 months ago. 3 weeks later, Capital Trust Financial made a six-figure donation to Holbrook's campaign through a PAC. 2 months after that, Stephen's company won a $70 million contract for highway expansion in upstate New York. Gerard stood abruptly. I'm advising both of my clients to cease this conversation immediately. Good advice, I said. You should probably also advise them that the FBI doesn't need their cooperation to continue investigating. The paper trail is already there. Stephen's phone buzzed again. Then Gerard's. Then Linda's. All within 10 seconds of each other. They looked at their screens with matching expressions of horror. What's happening? Linda whispered. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered pine trees. Right now, 15 members of Capital Trust Financial's board of directors are watching a live feed of this conversation. They've been watching since I walked through that door. The room went dead silent. You're lying, Stephen said, but his voice had no conviction. I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it up, showing them the recording app that had been running since I arrived. I'm not lying. I set up a concealed camera system in this cabin 3 days ago. High-definition video and audio, streaming directly to a secure server that's been sharing the feed with Capital Trust Board Counsel since 5 o'clock this afternoon. Gerard lunged forward. That's a legal recording without consent. Vermont is a one-party consent state for recordings, I said calmly. I own this property. I consented. That's all the law requires. I looked at Stephen. They heard everything. The affair, the hidden child, the insurance fraud, the medical procedures, all of it. Stephen's face went from white to green. He rushed to the bathroom. I heard him getting sick. Linda stared at me like I was a stranger. You planned this. All of it. I did, I confirmed. Down to the minute. I knew you'd bring Stephen here. I knew you'd try to blindside me with divorce papers and legal intimidation. So I made sure the people who actually control Stephen's future were watching when he implicated himself. Hannah spoke from the stairs. Dad, how did you know they'd come here? Your mother sent me an email 2 weeks ago suggesting we spend Christmas at the cabin. Said it would be good for processing our separation in a neutral space. I knew immediately it was a setup. She never suggests the cabin. She hates it here, says it's too rustic. I looked at Linda, but it was perfect for my purposes. Isolated, private, and equipped with fiber optic internet I had installed last summer specifically for this possibility. Gerard was frantically typing on his phone. I'm reporting this to the Vermont Bar Association. This is entrapment. It's evidence gathering. I interrupted. And you might want to worry less about me and more about your own license. Because the board just watched you attempt to facilitate a divorce settlement while knowing about fraudulent insurance claims and a hidden child that creates undisclosed liabilities. The lawyer's phone rang. He answered with shaking hands. Hutchins here. His face went pale as he listened. Yes, I understand. Yes, I'll cease representation immediately. He ended the call and looked at Linda. I can no longer represent you. I've been advised by my firm's managing partner to withdraw from this case immediately. Linda's voice was barely audible. They fired you. They're protecting themselves from association with potential criminal liability, Gerard said quietly. He gathered his papers and walked out the door without another word. We heard his car start, then the crunch of tires on gravel as he drove away. Stephen emerged from the bathroom, pale and sweating. Howard, we can work something out. The company, the board, they don't need to take this further. We can settle this privately. It's too late for private settlements, I said. The board has already initiated an emergency meeting to remove you as CEO. The vote's happening right now, actually. I checked my watch. Should be done in about 5 minutes. You can't know that, Stephen said desperately. I can, because I've been coordinating with Jennifer Caruso, the board's legal counsel, for the past 2 weeks. She was very interested in the documentation I provided, especially the parts about Chinese investment firms with questionable backgrounds funneling money into Capital Trust Financial. Stephen's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the couch, his head in his hands. The FBI will be contacting you tomorrow, I continued. They'll want to discuss the wire transfers from Pacific Dragon Ventures. That's the shell company you used to receive payments from the Chinese firm, isn't it? The one registered in the Cayman Islands. Stephen looked up at me with dead eyes. How did you find that? I'm very good at following money, I said simply. It's what I've done for 38 years. Hannah came down the stairs slowly, her phone in her hand. She'd been quiet through most of this, observing, processing. Now she looked at Linda with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger. Something colder. I called Arthur, Hannah said quietly. Linda's head snapped up. Arthur Walsh? Stephen's son? Why would you? Because he's my boyfriend, Hannah said. Has been for 8 months. And I just told him everything I heard tonight. The color drained from Stephen's face. You're dating my son? Was dating, Hannah corrected. Past tense. Because about 10 minutes ago, I told him about his father's affair with my mother. About the hidden brother he didn't know existed. And about the fraud. She looked at her phone. He's pretty upset. Says he's been suspicious of you for years, Dad. He knew something wasn't right. Stephen stood up, swaying slightly. Hannah, Arthur doesn't need to be involved in this. He's already involved, Hannah said coldly. He said he's going to his mother tomorrow. Your ex-wife. The one you cheated on before you started sleeping with my mom. He's going to tell her everything. She paused. He also said he's kept copies of some files from your home office. Financial documents you thought you deleted. He's turning them over to the FBI. I hadn't known about Hannah's relationship with Arthur Walsh. That was a complication I hadn't planned for. But as I watched Stephen realize his own son was about to testify against him, I understood this was poetic justice of a different kind. Hannah, I said gently, are you okay? She looked at me, her eyes wet but her jaw set firm. I'm angry. I'm hurt. But I'm not surprised. I think part of me always knew Mom was lying about something. I just didn't want to believe it. She turned to Linda. You made me think Dad was the problem. That he was cold and distant and didn't care about us. But he cared enough to document everything. To protect himself. To protect me. Linda tried to speak, but Hannah held up her hand. I don't want to hear it, Hannah said. I watched Dad's video. He showed me 2 years of evidence. Receipts, hotel records, medical claims, everything. He gave me the truth before you could spin your version of it. She walked to the door and grabbed her coat. I'm leaving. I'll stay at the hotel in town tonight. Dad, I'll call you in the morning. Wait, Linda said desperately. Hannah, please. We can talk about this. I can explain. There's nothing to explain, Hannah said, her voice breaking slightly. You had a baby with him. You hid it for 8 years. You lied to everyone, including me. She opened the door, letting in a blast of cold air. I have a brother I've never met because you were too selfish to tell the truth. How do you explain that? Linda had no answer. Hannah left, closing the door behind her with a quiet click that felt louder than a slam. The silence that followed was suffocating. Stephen sat motionless on the couch, staring at nothing. Linda stood frozen by the fireplace, tears running down her face, but making no sound. I pulled out my phone and made a call. It was answered immediately. Daniel, I said. It's Howard. The recording is complete. You can share it with the federal prosecutor now. Stephen's head jerked up. Who are you talking to? Daniel Reeves, my former supervisor at the IRS. He's been coordinating with the FBI on this case. I ended the call and looked at Stephen. In about 30 minutes, federal agents will arrive to ask you some questions about your company's foreign investments and political contributions. I'd suggest you don't try to leave. You're having me arrested? Stephen's voice was hollow. I'm not having you arrested. The FBI is following up on credible evidence of federal crimes. What happens next is entirely up to you and your answers to their questions. I picked up my coat. But if I were you, I'd start thinking about cooperation. They tend to be more lenient with people who help them build cases against bigger fish. I walked to the door, then paused and turned back. Linda, you should know something. The trust my father established, it includes a clause that voids any divorce settlement if the divorce is filed under grounds of adultery with documented proof. You won't get half of anything. You'll get what the prenuptial agreement specifies, which is exactly nothing. Her face crumbled completely. You made your choices, I said quietly. Now you get to live with them. I walked out into the December night, leaving them both in the wreckage they'd built. 3 days after the confrontation, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop in Hartford, Connecticut. Across from me sat an 8-year-old boy with Linda's eyes and Stephen's chin. Lucas Walsh, my wife's son, the child I'd known about for exactly 72 hours. Karen Walsh, Stephen's sister, sat beside him. She'd agreed to this meeting after I called her directly, bypassing Stephen entirely. He doesn't get a say in this anymore, she told me on the phone. I've been taking care of Lucas since he was born. I love that boy like he's my own. But he deserves to know the truth about where he came from. Lucas was quiet, picking at a chocolate chip muffin. Finally, he looked up at me. Are you really Hannah's dad? I am, I said gently. She's nice, Lucas said. She came to see me yesterday. Brought me a book about dinosaurs. He paused. She said you're the one who found out about me. I did. I'm sorry it took so long. Aunt Karen says my mom didn't want anyone to know about me because it would make things complicated. His voice was small. Does that mean she didn't want me? Karen put her hand on his shoulder. Lucas, it's not that simple. Yes, it is, I said quietly. I looked at the boy directly. Your mother made choices that hurt a lot of people. But you're not one of those choices. You're a person. You didn't do anything wrong. Lucas nodded slowly. My dad, he doesn't visit much. Aunt Karen says he's busy with work. Your dad is dealing with some serious problems right now, I said carefully. Problems he created himself. But that's not your fault either. Karen spoke up. Howard, I want you to know I had no idea about the affair until after Lucas was born. Linda showed up at my door pregnant, crying, saying she needed help. I thought I was doing the right thing by taking him in. You did do the right thing, I said. You gave him a stable home. That's more than either of his biological parents managed. Lucas looked at me with those familiar eyes. Hannah says I can come visit her sometimes. If that's okay with you. Something tightened in my chest. Of course it's okay. Hannah's your half-sister. Family is family, regardless of how complicated the circumstances are. Karen's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. I was afraid you'd want nothing to do with him. He's an innocent kid caught in the middle of adult failures, I said. I spent 38 years investigating fraud, but I've never punished someone for being a victim. I looked at Lucas. You deserve to know your sister, and she deserves to know you. Hannah had already visited Lucas twice. She'd called me after the first meeting, her voice thick with emotion. Dad, he's sweet. He's smart. And he has no idea how messed up the situation is. Then she'd ask the question I've been waiting for. Can we be in his life? Even after all this. I told her the same thing I was telling him now. You can choose your family, Hannah. Blood doesn't obligate you to anything. But if you want him in your life, I'll support that. Lucas finished his muffin and wiped his hands on a napkin. Can I ask you something? Anything. Hannah showed me a picture of her grandpa. Your dad. She said he built the cabin in Vermont with his own hands. He hesitated. Was he a good person? He was one of the best people I ever knew, I said. Strong. Honest. He taught me that character isn't about never making mistakes. It's about standing up when things get hard. I wish I could have met him, Lucas said softly. Me too, I said. And I meant it. My father would have loved this kid. Would have taught him to fish, to build things, to measure twice and cut once. Would have shown him what it meant to be a man of integrity. Karen stood. We should get going. Lucas has homework. I stood too and offered my hand to Lucas. He shook it solemnly, then surprised me by hugging me instead. Thank you for not being mad at me, he whispered. I held him for a moment. This child who existed because of betrayal but deserved none of the consequences. I could never be mad at you, Lucas. Never. As they left, I sat back down and finished my coffee. Hannah had texted me that morning. Arthur broke up with me. Says his family is too toxic, and he doesn't want to drag me into it. I'm sad, but I think I understand. I'd responded. You deserve someone who doesn't come with that much baggage. You're 22. There's time. The truth was simpler, though. Some damage was too deep to navigate around. For months after that December night in Vermont, I stood in my father's study, packing up the last of his books. The house had sold for above asking price. The trust had been fully transferred to my name. Linda had signed the divorce papers without contest after her lawyer explained she had no legal ground to stand on. Stephen Walsh was awaiting trial on 14 counts of wire fraud, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit bribery. The FBI had built their case methodically, using the evidence I provided as the foundation. Arthur had eventually cooperated too, providing additional documentation about his father's offshore accounts. Capital Trust Financial had settled with the board for an undisclosed sum and quietly dissolved Stephen's entire division. Senator Holbrook had resigned after leaked emails showed the quid pro quo arrangement. The investigation was ongoing. Linda was living in a small apartment in Albany, working as a bookkeeper for a local accounting firm. We didn't speak. She tried to reach out once through Hannah, asking if we could talk about closure. I'd sent back a simple message. We're closed. Hannah was finishing her senior year at Georgetown, thriving despite the chaos. She visited Lucas once a month, building a relationship with her half-brother that existed independent of the people who'd created him. She told me last week, "He's a good kid, Dad. He deserves better than what he got." "So do you?" I'd said. "I got you," she'd replied. "That's better than most people get." Patrick Flynn, the private investigator, had sent me a bottle of expensive whiskey with a note. "We're even now. Thanks for letting me help bury that son of a bitch." I'd hired him for another case, a legitimate one this time. He'd earned it. The doorbell rang. I walked downstairs and opened it to find Daniel Reeves standing there with a folder. "Thought you'd want to see this," Daniel said, handing it over. I opened it. Inside was a formal letter from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, thanking me for my service as a confidential informant and noting that my testimony had contributed to multiple successful prosecutions. There was also a check, a whistleblower reward from the Securities and Exchange Commission for reporting the corporate fraud at Capital Trust Financial. The amount made me blink. $780,000. The SEC pays out based on the recovered funds, Daniel explained. Your information led to a $12 million settlement. You get a percentage. I stared at the check. I didn't do this for money. I know. But the law rewards people who report fraud. You earned it. He paused. What will you do with it? I thought about Lucas. About the trust fund my father had established. About the future that kid deserved. I'm going to set up an education trust, I said. For Lucas. Full ride through college, graduate school if he wants it. He didn't choose his parents, but he can choose his future. Daniel smiled. Your father would have approved. After he left, I called Hannah. I'm thinking about teaching, I told her. Teaching what? Forensic accounting. There's a program at the community college looking for adjunct professors with real-world experience. Dad, you're 64 years old. Don't you want to just relax? I've been relaxing for 9 months, I said. It's boring. I'd rather do something useful. She laughed. Okay, Professor Phillips. Just promise me you won't turn into one of those professors who makes everything a war story. No promises. I hung up and looked around the empty study. My father had built this room with his own hands, just like he'd build a cabin, just like he'd build a life based on integrity and hard work. He'd seen through Linda from the beginning, had tried to warn me in his own subtle way. I hadn't listened then, but I'd learned. And I'd make sure Lucas learned too. That character mattered. That truth mattered. That you could survive betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. I picked up the last box of books and carried it to my truck. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Tomorrow I'd start fresh in a smaller house, a simpler life, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stay rather than people I tried to keep. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was honest. It was mine.